And Torsten, if we could, I know that you're a big picture guy, but I am curious, when you look ahead, where you think the growth in the US economy is going to come from. I was mentioning some of those sort of groups like solar, for example, or renewables or marijuana, that are perhaps dependent on legislation. But then we still have big tech roaring ahead in today's session early on. So how are you thinking about what's going to be, or what are going to be, some of the engines in the US?
Yeah, so a very, of course, obvious problem at the moment is the virus is still here. So from a simple equity perspective and credit perspective, it becomes very important to think about how long time will the virus still be here? When will we get a vaccine? Are those headlines going to come in already potentially the next few weeks? And if they do come, well, will we then see markets go up even before people begin to be vaccinated? So in that sense, markets might be trading somewhat differently from what the economy, and when we actually begin to see an increase in revenues and a rebound in revenues in those specific company names. But beyond the virus, there are obviously some very important themes that also, of course, always are worth paying attention to. Namely, as you say, ESG has been a theme now for a very long time. This is one theme that continues to be almost recession-proof, and almost also, in very broad sense at least, proof, at least safe from whatever political scenario you have, because this is the way that many things have been moving, at least for quite some time now, at least globally, more focused on renewable energy and ESG. Other themes, of course, are artificial intelligence, which also is a theme that's more generally not as sensitive to the business cycle as such. So I would look at it from, first of all, of course, bets that have directly to do with the virus and when a vaccine will come. And then there are some other themes, broadly speaking, which are generally unrelated to the virus, but nevertheless are likely to also continuously do relatively well, particularly if you have a longer horizon.
You know, Torsten, staying on Julie's economic thread, I would toss another theme into the mix here, rising household wealth. And if you look at Florida, they raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour, joining about 7 other states to do so. 43% of the U.S. workforce is now in states with minimum wages climbing to $15 an hour. What do you think the long-term economic impact from that is?
So obviously that has several different impacts in terms of raising minimum wages for those, of course, employers who are having people working at the minimum wage. That, of course, becomes more expensive. But at the same time, if you raise minimum wages, you also increase consumer spending. And consumer spending on lower income households generally have a higher marginal propensity to consume, which is a different way of saying that should, at least in general, be better for consumer spending overall. But when you look also at the data and you think about how many people are actually paying the minimum wage, it's actually a relatively small amount. It's in the single digits. So there's a very almost academic discussion thinking about, if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, how does that trickle up to other levels of wages just above? And the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, looked at that and came to the conclusion that it does have some implications for those that are just above $15 an hour, but it's not as dramatic as at least I would have thought. So the main conclusion is that raising minimum wages does raise the prospects of more consumer spending, but it does also at the same time, of course, increase the cost for companies that have a lot of workers that are paid the minimum wage.